Oh, what's good, y'all? Oh man, I love this topic today. I absolutely love this topic today, and I got some. And on this topic, what I'm talking about today, this is specifically towards, how can I say it? This video is specifically towards people who don't fit the mold. That's the best way I can say it. This video is for people who don't fit the mold of something, right? Who don't fit the mold of ideally what's expected, right? Now, that might not make sense. Let me lock this door so nobody walk in on this message, because I feel this one, right? So this message is basically, like I said, it's for anybody who doesn't fit the mold, right? Who doesn't quite appear to look the part, who doesn't look like, or may not look like, might not seem like everyone else, right? And that might not make sense. So let me kind of explain it. So hang with me here, right? So I want to go through the book of Hebrews, right? And it basically talks about, in Hebrews 7, it basically saying how Jesus was a high priest, right? So Jesus was a high priest, and not only was he any high priest, but if we had to rank high priests, like, you know, we say the GOAT, the greatest of all time or something, we always like to rank people and saying, all right, well, who was the best to do this? Who's the greatest ever to do this? Quite honestly, when we come to being a high priest, if we had to rank them all throughout the Bible, the greatest high priest of all time, he was Michael Jordan of high priests. Well, let me say, he was LeBron James of being a high priest. You know what I'm saying? I'm a LeBron fan, but no one was greater than, no one was a greater high priest than Jesus, right? Because, just no one was, right? Any high priest that came before him or after him, he was the greatest high priest that ever was, right? And he was called by God to be a high priest. And when I mean a high priest, like, a high priest basically, and if anyone doesn't understand, is someone who, how can I probably explain this? Basically, they make sacrifices on the behalf of, so he makes sacrifices to God on the behalf of others, right? So does that make sense? So if I'm a high priest, I'm gonna make my sacrifices, and I could be explaining this wrong, right? And if any of y'all know, let me wrong, because I ain't no genius. But basically, their job was to make sacrifices on behalf of others for God, right? And most high priests, right? Most high priests would not only make sacrifices for the sake of others, right? Sacrificing offerings for the sins of others, for the sins of others. Not only for others, but for themselves too, because they weren't perfect people like all of us. We have our sins, so basically they had to make sacrifices for their own sins and for the sins of other people, right? But Jesus was unlike everybody else who came above him, because like I said, they had to make sin offerings for people in front of them, for other people, and for themselves. But Jesus was unlike them, because Jesus only had to make sacrifices for other people, right? Jesus didn't have to make sin offers for himself, because Jesus was perfect. Jesus didn't commit any sins. Jesus was the only human ever to not commit sins. So when he make his sacrifice to God, he's not doing it for himself. It was only for other people. Unlike all those people before him who were, all those people before him who had to take their mess to God, and other people mess to God. But he was greater than all of them. And not only was his sacrifice, not only was, he didn't commit any sins, not only did he not have to bring his own sacrifices, but on top of that, his sacrifice was better than any other sacrifice ever, because he sacrificed his life he sacrificed his life not only for the people living at that time, but for everyone, for the rest of mankind until he returns. Like, I'm benefiting off his sacrifice. You're benefiting off his sacrifice. We're all benefiting off his sacrifice. Even people from back then. So that was the greatest sacrifice ever. And that was a huge sacrifice. Like, back then, the high priest before him was sacrificing goats and lambs and oxen, and they had to do that. But he took it a step further, right? He was like, nah, I'm gonna sacrifice my own life for everybody's sins. And no high priest will ever be able to do what I just did, right? So that was a huge sacrifice, right? And he's regarded, like I said, he's regarded as the best to ever do it. But let me tell you something. Jesus, right? Jesus was the high priest. Jesus was the greatest high priest there ever was. But he didn't fit the mold for that. And that's why Titus like fit in the mold. Jesus didn't fit the mold for that. Because little did he know, like, he didn't fit the mold because all the priests prior to him, you had to be a descendant of a guy named Levi. right? So there was a guy named Levi way in the Old Testament, right? And you had to be his descendant, right? You had to be his descendant in order to be a high priest. If you weren't one of his descendants from his family lineage, then you weren't qualified to be a high priest, right? But Jesus was called by God to be a high priest. Say that again. Jesus wasn't a descendant of Levi, but he was called by God to be a high priest. So no one, like I said, no one told me to be a high priest. No one was like, hey, I think you'll be a heck of a high priest. Or he didn't think to himself like, I wish I could be a high priest. No, God himself said, no, you are a high priest. I have plans for you and I have created you to be a high priest, right? Now I'm gonna say that again. He was called by God for God's plan for his life. And what I'm saying is, he didn't quite fit the mold. And people around him didn't feel Jesus was suitable enough to be doing what he was doing. Like, well, who are you? You weren't a descendant of Levi. Like, what? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you don't fit the mold for that. You're not required to do that. You don't fit the criteria for that. Like, who are you to be doing this? Right? But he was called by God. So it didn't matter what they said. And my whole message of this video is, it's the same with us. Some of us are called by God to do things, right? But we don't quite fit the mold. We don't quite meet the criteria based on everyone else's terms, right? Based on like what culture says today, right? That's the things that we're living in, right? That's the things that we're living in, we're currently enduring, right? Because God has placed something in all of us. God might have placed something in you, right? And God places something in all of us, right? But the thing that he might have placed in you you might not seem to fit the part for that, right? You might not look like everybody else who's doing that, right? You might be, no one else in your gender. You might be a woman. You might be a woman that may be called to God to do something that only men do, right? You might be of another race. You might be of another minority to do something that no one else of your race or minority has ever done, right? Or people that tend to look like you might not do, or somebody that's your age, right? With some people you might say you're too young to be doing this, right? You're too young to be doing this. Or I'll take it a step further. Some people feel like you're too old and your dreams have passed you by and you can't do that. Like, no, you're too old to be doing that, and you don't fit the mold for that. But what I'm saying is, like, look, if you have that deep desire and you really ask yourself, and really matter that don't ask yourself, ask God, like, God, are you calling me to this? Right? Because if God is calling to you this, then it must work. If God is calling you to something, that means he wants you to do it. So if he wants you to do it, don't be afraid, don't be scared of like the fear and the obstacles. Like, I don't know if I could do this, or could I do this? Or I'm not sure. Or everybody else saying I can't do it. Nah, forget that. Because if God is calling you to something, oh man, it has to work. Like, it has to work. Because this is God's doing. This is not my doing, right? And I'm saying that to say, like, look, Jesus, like I said, Jesus did not fit the mold, but he was the greatest ever, right? He was the greatest ever. There will never be another like Jesus. But imagine how Jesus, and he wouldn't do this, but hypothetically speaking, imagine if Jesus didn't listen to this call, right? Imagine if Jesus would have listened to the naysayers. Imagine if Jesus would have listened to the doubters. Imagine if Jesus would have accepted that false ideology that he wasn't qualified to do that. Oh, well, they said I'm not a descendant, or I'm not of this. I'm not a descendant of Levi. Or I'm not like them. I'm not like all those who are ahead of me, right? So I can't do it. Imagine if he would have never did that. Where would we be today? Because like I said, like, where would we be today? And I'm so glad that he listened to God, right? That he obeyed God. And what I'm saying is, like, you need to obey God. We all need to obey God. Because if God has placed that in you, it don't matter what they say. That's man. That's people. Like, forget the naysayers and forget what stereotypically you may look like. Nah, forget that. Like, if God has called you to something, follow that. Because like I said, Jesus was the greatest ever in something. I'm gonna take it a step further. Even in present day, man, as a black man, right? I'm so glad that everyone who was the first to do something didn't listen to the naysayers, right? Like, I'm so glad Barack, forget it, regardless if you like Barack Obama, your political party, I'm so glad a black man didn't listen to everybody else, and you know what I'm saying, or he didn't. I'm so glad a black man still ran for president, right, and believed that he could do it to show that everyone else it is possible, right? The first black doctor, I'm so glad the first black doctor, you know what I'm saying, went against all naysayers and went along and did it, right? Or like the Jackie Robinsons and the Muhammad Ali's, and regardless if you're a fan of all these people or not, they were still the first. They'll be trailblazers. And I'm just saying those people, regardless of any race, right? Even women who have been the first to do something, right? Like the women inventors and the women inventors and artists and first and CEOs and vice presidents and president. I mean, all the stuff that's to come. Like, man, like if God has called you to something, don't listen to what everybody else says. Just because your calling might not fit you might not fit the mold. Because if that's the case, if God's calling you to something, then there is no mold, right? There is no mold. That's a cultural thing that we do. If God has called you to something, like, no, taste that. Because what God may be calling you to do is to break that mold, right? So not only for you to do, right, but to get everyone else to do, to get for others to see that it is possible. So if God has called you to something, no matter your age, your race, your ethnicity, your whatever that may be, like, God might be trying to break that mold through you. So don't be afraid to follow your dreams, follow what you feel your callings is, follow what your passions is, follow what God has placed inside of you. Because what He placed inside of you is great, man. Man, so I mean, look at me for example. And I'm wearing the chain, earrings, and a Yankee cap, talking about the Bible. Don't nobody look like me at my age doing this. So I'm saying that to say, man, if I didn't do this, I'd just be wondering what else. Or, dang, like, what else? I wish I would have did this. I would have tried this. Living my life with regret. And regret is one of the worst feelings like ever, cause like it's something you can't do about it. You don't want to live your life and look back at your life and be living with regret. So I'm saying that to say, don't make decisions. Don't be afraid to do something because of what other people may say. Right? Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Don't be afraid of to do something, to try something, to chase your dreams because of what, the perceptions of others or other many things, being ridiculed by others. Not forget that, because only you're gonna be affected by that. Only you're gonna be affected by that at the end of the day, and you don't live your lives for others, because only you're gonna feel that pain. The people that doubted you, they're not gonna lose no sleep at night. If you don't, if they don't see you succeed, man. So man, I just hope that encourage y'all, and man, yeah, man, chase your dreams. Don't worry about naysayers, or if you don't, like I said, fit the mold, or don't look like what everybody else is, or might be the first person like you to do what you're doing. So man, I love y'all, and I'm signing out. Peace.